And now we're going to look at so-called Carlsbad variation, which is characterized by the pawn structure formed after exchange on d5. C takes d5, E takes d5, and white normally goes bishop g5. It seems a little bit illogical after what all we discussed, that black's main problem in the queen's gambit decline is bishop c8, that white is voluntarily taking on d5, reducing tension in the center and opening this diagonal for bishop, which could go on e6, f5, or even g4. But on the other hand, white has a long-term strategic plan based on the fact that after black plays c6, which is quite inevitable because it has to protect pawn on d5 and also prepare the comfortable development of bishop, which is otherwise could be met by queen goes on b3. If bishop goes too early, let's say now bishop goes on f5, then of course after queen b3, it's all structure could be jeopardized. So after c6, white in theory could start preparing so-called minority pawns attack, where white could start pushing b4, b5, if necessary. After a6 they can play a4 and then b5, and exchanging pawns on the queen side and creating the weakness. Either pawn on c6, or if black exchange on b5, there will be isolated pawn on d5 and potential weaknesses on a7 and b7. It's all good in theory, and of course black could have their own chances of trying to occupy e4 square and potentially creating some chances on the king side. But generally speaking, white's position in the center is more solid, and it gives it an edge. Not necessarily long-term long-term initiative, but possibilities for varying the plans, using its slight domination in the center. A part of the traditional plan that I've described, which could be shown by the moves bishop e7, say e3, castle, bishop d3, knight bd7, knight f3, c6, queen c2, rook e8, which is one of the key positions, castle, knight f8, and now say rook b1, preparing b4 and advance on the queen side. White could always also play say rook e1 here in this position, trying to install knight on e5 and then protected by pawn on f4. And there are certain positions that could arise after bishop e6. Say just all the lines are general. I'm not quoting any games. Knight e5, knight g4, taking on e7, queen takes e7, taking on g4, taking, and then probably f4. Or even immediately playing here f4, and after f6, taking on g4, taking, playing maybe f5, and then trying to have a pawn's attack on the king side after white queen is moved from f2 probably to f4. The most comfortable way for black to equalize is to play knight e4 here, which is a very typical maneuver based on the fact that after bishop takes a7, queen e7, knight on e4 is protected already by rook and a queen. And this position was quite heavily analyzed and tested in practice, but always black found its way to equalize after bishop e4, d4, knight d2, f5, f3, take on f3, both knight takes f3 and bishop e6, and black was safe. So rook a b1 is very traditional way of playing, and it leads to not complicated but very tense game. So far it seems that black had enough resources. That's why white always tried to find other ways of playing. For instance, in this position, one of the popular moves is to play h3, which sounds a little bit odd, but white's idea after knight f8 to go bishop f4, which sounds odd again, but when you look at the position, it makes a lot of sense, because white is saving this bishop from potential exchange after knight e4, and preventing knight e4 keeps a little pressure on black's position, because the battery on queen c2, bishop d3 prevents black bishop to be actively developed, and also black to use the potential stronghold on e4. So after bishop d6 and exchanges, white could go either long castle or short castle. and it leads to different positions. But even long castle, remember the Rubinstein's idea, gives white some nice chances of attacking, of combining the attack on the king side with potential pressure on the center, because black will have inevitably play c6, c5, prepare some counter attack on the queen side, but then after exchange on c5 there will be an isolated pawn on d5. So it's black could also start playing knight g6 here, and then after bishop h2, bishop d6 again, and now it seems that black has an extra tempo. But after a long castle, g4, g5, and potentially h4, h5, knight on g6 could give an extra tempo for white to create initiative, to develop the initiative here. One of the games to be looked at in this line is Portish-Larsen. Their match in 1977 convincingly won by Portish, both the game and mentioned game and the match. White also played h3, it's a favorite Karpov move, after castle and knight f8. The idea is quite similar. White is trying to avoid all the exchanges, and after knight e4, it could simply go bishop f4, keeping the bishop alive, and then black has an unpleasant choice. To protect knight on e4, it has to play f5, but then you see the e5 square is too weak. So that's why black normally refrains from knight e4, and then white also could go bishop f4, or if black plays knight g6, actually holding the bishop there, then white prepares the attack on minority attack on the queen side, even giving up the bishop, because then eventually black can avoid having not isolated, but the weak pawn on c6 after all the exchanges, which gives white a small but solid and enduring edge. White also has other plans that we should mention. It could also try to place its knight on e2, so developing the pieces, starting with queen c2, for instance, c6, knight ge2, rook e8, and now again both castles, a long castle and short castles, being played and considered interesting ways for white to play for advantage. Personally, I always preferred short castle, and I played this position a number of times because here is white a part of the traditional plan with b4, b5, has another interesting idea of playing f3 and e4. So trying to actually use the possibility of organizing a strong center. And also it changes the nature of the game. My practical experience, and I think the general results are somehow in favor of white, and I could quote a few of my own games that were played. One, I beat Ulf Andersson in Belfort World Cup in 1988 in this position, and it could demonstrate the ideas that white always use in this modified version of Carlsbad. Also, I won one nice game against Nigel Short, now World Championship match in 1993. There was a different moves order. I actually refrained of playing queen c2. I played knight e2, and after rook e8, castle, Nigel played knight f8. And here I made interesting move b4, just figuring out that after bishop takes b4, bishop f6, gf6, white has an interesting move. Knight takes d5, queen d5, queen a4, in fact attacking both rook on e8 and bishop on b4. So the best line in fact for black is something like bishop h3, knight f4, queen a5, take, knight takes h3, knight e6, and white has small edge. Knight is not well placed on h3, but black's pawns are also not good. So Nigel didn't take the pawn. He continued this quiet development, but then white actually managed to protect the pawn on b4. I think I either played a3 or queen b3 in this position, and then combined two plans with f3 and potential development of initiative on the queen side. I managed to win the game. And those are different versions, of different modifications of White's plan in this line. We should also mention that black very often use the trick of playing knight bd7, rook e8, knight f8, refraining from c6, because they always had in mind that if white king goes on the queen side, so if white castles on the long side, then black could always play bishop e6, rook c8, c7, c5, saving a tempo, not wasting a tempo on c6. Those are very, very minor details that they played a huge role in a professional high-class chess 100 years ago, or even now. So that's how we actually, define the opening strategy, by always understanding this little minor differences that could in fact make a huge difference if you enter big complications. Just imagine you have opposite kings on the opposite sides of the board. White king castle long side, black king is on g8, and it's an attack on both sides. And this minor detail of black saving on c7, c6, and in fact playing c7, c5 could play a huge role. So white eventually should also watch that, and it could also try to either modify its plans, going immediately casting short, or there were a number of games where white even ignored that, believing in the strengths of its position after long castle. After all, I think now white is sticking moreover with a short castle, and the idea of having knight on e2, it's probably more dominant, because it's widely considered that this position, this location of the knight gives white more wider options in fighting for initiative. Just remind you again, it could be the same plan with b4 and b5, attacking pawn on c6, or f3, e4, preparing an assault in the center. So in overall, Carlsbad structure was considered to be in favor of white, and black tried number of other options here, trying to resolve the problem of bishop c8 immediately. For instance, c7, c6, and after e3, it even played bishop f5. So looks natural, but after queen f3, black has to accept the fact that the pawns on the king side will be badly damaged. But it's an endgame, and there are two bishops, and some players like Nigel Short, for instance, believe that this structure is quite playable for black, and Short, and for another one was Rafael Vaganian, who played it even earlier. In my view, white keeps an edge, and there are many games being played. Nothing convincing for white, but I would prefer to look at the position from white's angle. I have to also mention that there was an sharp attempt. It's a game Smyslov-Pachman played many years ago. I think it's 1956 in Moscow, when black tried to play queen b6 here, and then after queen a5, queen takes b2, queen c8 check, king e7, knight takes d5, c d5, queen c1. It occurred that, despite both kings are misplaced, then eventually white had a solid advantage, because d5 pawn proved to be a decisive weakness. Also, black has a possibility here of playing queen b6, trying to start an immediate assault on d2 pawn, and after queen c2, for instance, playing knight e4. But those lines proved to be not sufficient for black to create an efficient counterplay. Also, we have to mention that white could play immediately queen c2 here, and then there is an option of playing knight a6, trying to use white's queen on c2, preparing knight b4, but it's also, in my view, was not sufficient to guarantee black a comfortable game. But also, just let's not forget that black knight on a6 does not have to go on b4, by all means. If white just plays a3, knight goes on c7, e6. And here we have to mention a very important, in fact, fundamental idea that was introduced by Swedish Grandmaster Gideon Stallberg. So the idea is just, when we look at the classical position, so was to, c6, e3, say bishop e7, bishop d3, knight bd7, and say knight f3, knight f8, trying to save a tempo, because then rook f8 square is not occupied by the rook and should waste time on rook a8. Queen c2, knight e6, bishop h4, g6, and then knight g7 and bishop f5. As you could see, this very long and complicated maneuver was aimed to resolve the main problem of Queen's Gambit decline, the problem of bishop on c8. After knight g7 and bishop f5, eventually the bishops, white square bishops are exchanged, and black enjoyed a comfortable game. In many other lines of Carlsbad structure, this maneuver is being, black is employing this maneuver as the main idea of solving the problem of bishop c8, and also exchanging the bishop on d3, which plays an important role in keeping an eye on e4 square. That's it's an own term, is a very important stronghold for developing black initiative, a potential initiative on the king side. So that's why playing knight a6 in some positions, it could be not only a possible intrusion on b4, but preparing the same idea of knight c7, knight e6, g6, and knight g7. So by looking at all these different situations, we could also conclude that white has slight strategic initiative. That's why black eventually in this position at move 3 after knight c3 had a clever thought. Why not to prevent this exchange on d5 followed by this pin or bishop g5 by developing bishop first, playing bishop e7, which the idea that was popular in 60s thanks to Boris Spassky, who played quite regularly. He was not very keen on playing classical Carlsbad structure, so he played bishop e7. In fact, it was even played before, and we can look at several games of the match Botvinnik-Petrosian, where Petrosian wisely avoided playing the classical Carlsbad structure, which was but one of Botvinnik's favorites for many years, in fact for several decades, and also chosen bishop e7. So in 60s this line was very popular, and eventually it was employed by Karpov, who played it against Korchin, against myself, and now it's still popular. Also white, instead of just going to the line knight f3, knight f6, which is a transposition to the classical Queen's Gambit, played cd5, ed5, and bishop f4. So it's again Carlsbad structure, but slightly different, and we just have to recognize the differences, which could be quite formidable, because now after c6, e3, bishop f5, black bishop is comfortably developed. But we just keep these positions in the group of what we unite under the name of bishop f4. So we'll talk about different structures, both from Carlsbad and in a classical Queen's Gambit, with white bishop developed on f4, and that will be a separate segment, a separate part of our investigation.